Okay, hi everyone. I will give everyone just a moment to trickle in. We are very excited to kick off here and start the webinar. Okay, why don't we start? All right, I'm so excited to kick off our webinar today. I am joined by Brian Cantor, our Managing Director at CMP, and Jared Greenison, Go-to-Market Lead at Diabolocom. We are going to kick off with some research from our collaborative report on the future of AI-enabled teams. Before we start here, I would love to just kick off with a round of introductions. Brian, would you mind starting us off?
Definitely. Well, if you've been part of a CCW webinar in the past 17 years, you've probably seen me, but I'm Brian Cantor. I am Managing Director for CMP and specifically oversee our CCW Digital division. So that has led me to conduct a lot of research, publish a lot of content, work with a lot of organizations on really what it takes to elevate their customer experiences. And of course, as we know, you can't do that if you're not focusing on the employee experience. And so really today's topic where we get to understand the connection between the two, understand how the impact of AI is affecting what we need from our employees, our ability to make them ready to interact with customers. That was very fascinating for me. And I'm excited to dive into the research, excited to work with our fellow speakers here, and excited to answer any questions we have from the audience.
Yeah.
Jared, I'll kick things over to you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jared Greenison. I'm trying to match Brian's energy here. I mean, he really brought it there. Brian, are you in New York? I mean, your background kind of looks like near NYU. Is that, where are you?
So that I am in New York. In fact, I'm rocking my Knicks colors.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. So, and actually, yeah, this is we have our office out of these pictures. You know, I know that conventional webinar wisdom may say have a flat background behind you. I wanted to jazz it up. I wanted to bring that New York energy. So we have some great pictures behind us.
I love it. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now, based out of Minneapolis. But yes, my name is Jared Greenison. I'm the go-to-market lead for Diabolocom, AI-powered cloud contact center based out of Paris. We're expanding in North America, and my job is to help everyone out with our global expansion. So I'm happy to be here. The research that we sponsored, I think, tells an amazing story about some of the real hurdles that contact center operators are facing, specifically in a market that's near and dear to us, the mid-market. So happy to dive in. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So you mentioned, Jared, the research report. We're so excited to share our findings, and Brian is going to kick us off with a little research and to share a lot of those findings today, and then we will shift into a Q&A. So please leave questions in the chat, and we will answer them at the end, and we will also end off with a fireside chat. So with that, I will hand things over to you, Brian, and I will rejoin you guys for the fireside chat portion.
Definitely. Well, thrilled to be sharing some data here. So as Brooke mentioned, our focus will be going through the data, then really looking specifically at what we found as far as where organizations, based on their experience with AI so far, see it going, see it affecting the front lines, and see it elevating the need to think about workforce. We'll then look at the reality of the employee perspective and understanding what it really means for them, what we can do to give them a bigger seat at the table and turn it into not a new source of frustration, not a new source of disenchantment, but instead a true source of empowerment. And then, as Brooke said, we'll dive into some questions and really help internalize the data and interpret it for all of you. Now, this report is going to be available, so you'll be able to download it here. You'll also be able to get it from the CCW Digital website. If for some reason you're having trouble accessing it, let us know. We're happy to send it to you as well. This is research that we in Diabolocom were thrilled to get to, because one of the things I've been covering this industry, as I mentioned, for almost 20 years now. And for the longest time, the theme was tech is getting in the way. Back when we were talking about multi-channel, it was, well, our channels aren't good enough to respond to customers. We don't have the right tech platforms. As we moved into omni-channel, it was, well, our tech isn't connected with each other, and so we can't really deliver that singular experience. And then when we started deploying AI, it was, well, AI, it's cute, it's fun, it adds some value, but it's never going to replace what a human can do on the front lines. It's never going to really provide meaningful service. Well, we're finally at the point where that landscape is shifting, where it really seems like tech isn't the bottleneck anymore. Tech is getting very good. You've all interacted with AI in your personal lives. Many of you operate it within your customer contact functions. You know that it can really understand customers. It can really provide personalized and relevant responses. It can take action. It can make exceptions. It can foster collaboration. It can do all these amazing things to really elevate the experience. Suddenly now the bottleneck could actually be our human workforce. If we do not have our human teams ready to evolve to more consultative work, to be handling more complex tasks, to be able to make that deeper connection, then we're investing all this money to automate our front lines. When the customer does escalate, when they do go to speak to a live agent, that agent can't meet that standard and suddenly it falls flat. And I've actually spoken to organizations in this space who are hesitant to go all in on AI-based self-service because they're acknowledging that their teams are not ready for how it will shift their workflow. And so what we want to do with this research is understand exactly where we are. What is the extent of this human bottleneck? If we are going to be changing the landscape, changing the way we interact, what does that mean for our human teams? And the findings were encouraging in some respects insofar as we know humans are going to play a role, but also concerning in others because they let us know there's a lot of work we have to do if we want to continue to maintain that humanity in the age of AI. So moving into some of the data here. So one, no surprise, you're not on this webinar if you think AI is not the future. You're probably not listening to conversations if you think that either. It continues to rank very heavily. So more than 9 in 10 organizations say that they're committed to prioritizing AI investments moving forward. So this is going to be the dominating topic for many, many years. It's the dominating focus of strategy, of investment, of measurement. So no surprise there. Now, it's not just something that we're talking about. It's something that we're really committing to taking action on. We, as part of CMP, we research the executive priorities every year. And of the top 5 priorities, 3 directly relate to AI. There's increasing self-service adoption, and then there's investing in more agentic and generative AI. Those are all top 5 priorities. The only other 2 indirectly connect to AI. So you have improving customer data and intelligence. Of course, when you use AI correctly, you certainly gather better data, better intelligence. So it fits that. And then 5 was reducing costs, and AI is automation. It is about scalability and efficiency. So, of course, you should expect some cost reduction, some operational improvement as well. So the long story short here is that AI is very much on the radar, and it very much means we have to think about what it means. And yes, I see a comment. The slides will be shared after the presentation. Just as a note, though, this will be a high-level snippet of the data. The full report will have all the breakdowns, all the stuff you need to know to really take action on what we're sharing today. So, with that, though, all this investment in AI, we know that we're talking a lot about the investment in self-service. We want to see more adoption there. Self-service resolution rate is actually a top 3 metric, which means that many organizations are very much saying the success of our contact center is based on how many issues we contain in self-service. So you may say, wait, that makes us afraid. Are we still going to have humans involved, or are we pivoting into this entirely agentic front line? Well, the good news from the data right now is that 89% of organizations still expect humans to play a critical role in the customer service process. So they're still interacting with customers, they're still solving problems, they're still taking a strong lead. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be doing the same thing they always were doing. In fact, many expect them to pivot to primarily handling high complexity, high customization cases, those exceptions, those edge cases, those areas where that standard knowledge-based answer isn't going to be sufficient or certainly isn't going to be spectacular. That's going to be more and more of the agent's day. But so that really means 2 things. One, we certainly don't have to worry about every single contact center agent getting fired. We don't have to worry about it being purely an AI-driven function. Humans are going to play a role here. But it also means that we're increasingly thinking about a different role, one where they're really tapping into that human ingenuity, adding value that can't be automated, doing things a traditional bot or AI agent can't do. That's what we want to be focusing on. And as we look at that, we see that one of the areas behind the cliche here is that, when we think about AI for simple, humans for complex, it's not as simple as a buzzword. It's not just, let me say something that says how important human agents are going to be, and it magically comes true. If we want to get to that landscape, we have to consider some real factors here. So we know, for instance, that there is the need to make the workplace more efficient. If there is high friction in the employee experience, that's going to directly impact their ability to solve complex issues. Think of it this way. we know agent effort prevents employees from handling basic inquiries. They can't reset someone's password or process a payment if they have to leap through 47 different tools to do so. Imagine when it's an area where the answer is not obvious, when the process has never been done before, where we're expecting agents to really tap into the organizational framework to understand how to proceed. That's going to require a lot more access to systems, and any second that's wasted in unnecessary friction is going to trickle down to the customer. Now, also, if we're talking about consultative work and being that second tier, that second line of defense, if you will, when self-service doesn't work, that's going to require more competency. New skills are required to demonstrate that expertise, to think outside the box, to handle real resolutions. And while things like empathy and emotional intelligence, we may innately ascribe them to the human workforce, they historically haven't been using it. We haven't asked them to do that for every single customer. We haven't been measuring or holding them accountable for that. So even though many humans should have these skills internally, it doesn't mean that they've actually activated them, which means there could still be a competency gap as far as actually demonstrating real emotional intelligence, real empathy, and so forth on the interactions. We also want to look at impact as well. So we all obviously know that as they are playing a big role in this higher value work, it's going to change the way that customers think about the interaction. You know, their demeanor, their engagement is going to matter a lot. As I alluded to earlier, when you're talking about a forgotten password inquiry, you don't have to be that happy. You don't have to be that dialed in or connected to make that really work. If you're getting to the point where you actually now are handling something where someone lost a loved one, or they're dealing with critical payment issues, or just something really frustrating is happening, your demeanor, your engagement, your satisfaction as an employee, that means a lot more. The impact is a lot greater. And that means we really have to rethink the way we approach things like culture, engagement level, and so forth. And so the challenge, though, is that we're not really good at any of those areas right now. And this was something that the research really uncovered. So you look at friction. Friction is the standard. It's the norm in today's contact center environments. We know that right now, many leaders say that agents are spending too much time navigating through multiple systems. So not only is it multiple systems throughout the day, roughly 3/4 say that employees have to access multiple systems within a single interaction. So you're trying to show this customer that, hey, you're the expert, you're the resource, you're the consultant, you're the person they can trust. And they've already put all this time into self-service. They get to you, and then you can't help them because you have to go through 15 different systems just to find out where the customer is in the journey, just to be that expert that they were promised. That doesn't look good. And not only does it not look good for the customer, as an employee, it makes you frustrated. It makes you disengaged. And what happens when you're frustrated and disengaged? You don't deliver that warm, empathetic, friendly service that we know is the key to relationships. And so that really has a problem. And you look across, we have other data points here showing generally they don't have consistent access to data. The channels are disconnected, so they don't get that 360-degree view. And we also know that ultimately, right now, they're just simply not able to do what is needed to make this work. Now, we know friction, we know fragmentation is a problem, but when you look at the fact that right now, organizations are not even measuring agent effort, not actively taking efforts to eliminate some of this friction and unify all their platforms, you start to see the real problem. Friction is not going to be solved. And if friction isn't solved, we know it's going to greatly inhibit the employee's ability to take on more complex work. We also want to look at the learning curve here. And so, we talked about competency. Unfortunately, only 17% of leaders think that their employees are capable of handling more consultative next generation work. 17%. Now, that's a terrible number. I'm not going to pull any punches here. That's not good. What makes it even more crushing is that number 2 years ago was 16%. So 2 years ago, we identified that employees were talking about this idea of pivoting to more complex work. Leaders felt they weren't ready. You would hope in all that time they would say, let's improve our training, let's improve our hiring, let's improve our systems to make them more ready. Well, 2 years later, we've seen no movement. We've moved by 1%. And so that really shows you that we are not doing what we need to get employees ready for this next generation focus. We also want to look at the fact that there is a retention gap. We are not keeping the best talent, and we're not really improving culture, improving hiring, improving compensation or motivation in a way that's going to attract that strong talent. Now, in this era where we're talking about the edge cases, the consultative work, tenure becomes more important. This isn't the kind of thing that you can master with a 1-week crash course. It's not the kind of thing you can master just by having an AI augmented knowledge base. You're going to need people who really understand the various ways customers ask questions, the various types of outcomes they expect, the areas where the knowledge base proves inadequate and human ingenuity is required. That only comes from expertise. It only comes from experience. It only comes from buy-in. And if we're not retaining great talent, we're not going to have them there as well. Now, one of the biggest drivers of retention, one of the biggest drivers of performance, and a real reason why everyone on this call is so important is that we know leadership support, leadership competency, manager quality plays a huge role in the employee experience. Well, unfortunately, right now, leaders identify managing the AI augmented workforce as one of the most difficult challenges to solve in the customer contact function. So leaders, managers, they're confused. How do I have to change to be a better resource for my teams? If they're not quite ready to be a better manager, then not only do you have employees having all these gaps and having all these concerns, you don't have a mechanism for fixing them. You don't have a mechanism for getting them on the right track. And that's sort of why this competency gap persists. And that's why we need to be concerned as well. And then on top of all that, we know the cliche, what gets measured gets managed. Well, right now, we haven't really been adjusting scorecards for these new skills. This emphasis on personalization, this emphasis on empathy, this emphasis on more meaningful work. And so agents are not getting the insight they need to know where their gaps are. Leaders don't know what to train them on. We don't really calibrate everyone around what's needed to go forward. And so we're left with these continued gaps and continued problems. And then finally, we talked about getting the employee in the right sentiment, making them feel like they're empowered and part of the organization. Well, we see here that employee voices are greatly muted. So when we look at right off the bat, many tech decisions are made outside the contact center. So they're made by IT teams, they're made by the C-level, they're made by other stakeholders who are not really aware of exactly what this means for the frontline employee. They may share in some high-level metrics. They may say, hey, we too want to cut costs, we too want to increase revenue, but they don't really know what it means for the frontline employee because they're not working in the space. And so that leads to the belief that this technology is going to be very impositional. And then we amplify that, we exacerbate that by the fact that, as you see here, only about a third of organizations are really assessing the impact of new tech on employees or listening to their feedback on whether it's working. So we're deploying all this. We're saying, hey, this is going to make your life easier. It's going to make customers happier. It's going to boost efficiency. But we're not seeing what this means for the employee. We're not checking in on them. We're not getting their take. Best case scenario, the employee doesn't feel very well valued. They don't feel very well heard. And so they don't love your technology decisions. They don't trust you as much. And that's not a great place to be. Worst case scenario, they don't use the tech because they didn't feel like they were part of it. They don't properly adopt it. You don't know what's working and what's not working. You can't improve it properly. You can't iterate. You can't invest moving forward. You can't know exactly how workflow should change. That stunts progress even further. That gets us away from what we're trying to achieve here. And then, so obviously what we want to be doing here, and this is something that certainly we're going to be talking about in the panel, we want to start to build a framework for success. And so right off the bat, we want to have a seat at the table. So it is imperative to involve employees in the decision-making process. One, directly asking them what they need as far as tech, but two, starting to measure things like employee effort, where we can really understand this is where the employee is spending most of their time. So if we're going to automate a so-called boring task or repetitive task, let's start there. Let's start with not what some tech vendor told us was the biggest problem. Let's start with what our employees see as the biggest problem, because then they're going to use it and it's going to make a meaningful impact on their day-to-day. We also have to greatly optimize our real-world AI testing. One of the startling findings from this study was that about half of organizations are not assessing their readiness to invest in AI. An even bigger percentage are not doing robust testing of what these tools look like in practice. So again, you buy into the hype, you hear this amazing solution from great marketing copy, and then you use it and it doesn't work as planned. You have different kinds of interactions hitting your contact center that you weren't planning on. You have employee workforce changing in a way that you weren't expecting. You don't know how to prepare for it. The employee gets disengaged, the training doesn't improve. Ultimately, you're not getting to where you need to get to solve the real problems. Finally, we again have to look at big picture ramifications. Contact centers, we have said for so long, they're not about individual interactions. They're about the whole journey. They're about the end-to-end experience. But if we don't understand exactly what it takes to get employees in position to succeed on a macro level, what compensation and training do they need? How will their role truly evolve? What are some other tasks that are outside of customer support that they may be expected to focus on in this contact center of the future? If we don't really map out those big picture ramifications, we're not going to be successful. And so certainly these are 3 frameworks that you want to take seriously. I know we're going to be talking a lot about those in the Q&A here. So Brooke, I'm going to tap you back in to get us started.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. And a lot to unpack here, so I'm very excited to start our discussion. I also shared a few polls while you were going through the slides, Brian, so we have some feedback from the audience, which is great. But I want to start from the beginning because you mentioned an interesting stat that I think is aligned with everyone on this call today on the poll that we asked them. So the big question, you just covered the fact, Brian, that 89% of leaders still believe that humans will play a role on the front line. Yet we continue to see discussions of AI displacement. So, Jared, I want to get your perspective. How can we reconcile those two realities? How do you see the frontline dynamic really shifting as we look ahead?
Yeah, it's like the question of the report. I love that it's at the top, and thank you, Brian, for running us through the slides there. I thought that was excellent. Key to the question is this contradiction, right? I don't think that I don't think that there is much of a contradiction, and I'd reconcile it this way. I think we have what we need now to push back on, Brian mentioned marketing copy, something near and dear to my heart, but I think we have the tools to push back against some of the stories that we're hearing at conferences, this dynamic of automate or status quo. I think that's because it's not really the choice that leaders need to make, and it's not the one that they're making according to the data. It's much less extreme. That's where the whole augmentation story comes from. And anecdotally, I think it's a little funny. I was watching your Knicks, Brian, on the NBA Finals, and there was this ad from a huge bank, and they were running ads alongside OpenAI and Anthropic during the finals, and their message was a guy's going through his life. He's ordering coffee, he's getting a ride, he's telling his smart assistant to turn off the lights, and these robots keep disappointing him. So in comes the bank, and it says, we're building spaces for more and more people to talk to people, not more and more inventing more and more ways for people to talk to robots. I think that's also an extreme message, but I think it points to where we're at today, right? People are living with AI now. They're having experiences with AI now. So I think contact center leaders need to ask themselves the question, what is the experience that I'm offering through this AI, not just AI for AI's sake, but where is the line for me? What are the use cases that I can automate really well? What are the use cases that my employees would love if I automated away? And what's going to provide that value to customers? So again, I don't think it's about automate everything or status quo. I think it's about a gradual journey and learning about where the value really comes from when it comes to AI on the contact center. Your thoughts? Other than go next in 5?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the end of the series on Saturday when we all get to celebrate. But one thing I would definitely say here is that I think you hit on a really important point, which is that when you ask people at the high level, do you want to be served by AI or a human? Even the most tech savvy, I hate talking on the phone, I hate dealing with customer service, they're going to say the human because of the framing that they have. They have the belief that you're getting something less or you're getting something different. It's not because they actually love the human. If you were instead to frame it as, would you rather wait on hold for 3 minutes or get your answer right away? Would you rather have to re-explain your issue or have someone that already knows what you're looking for? That would change the framing. The problem is that they haven't seen that with AI. And so they associate these benefits that should exist in an automated world. They associate that with humanity because the technology has been so disappointing that sort of shaped the balance. It's the same thing I think about with years ago where people would say, I prefer phone to digital, yet their behavior in every other walk of life said otherwise. No one wanted to call, especially people under a certain age, and yet they would answer our surveys and our polls saying the only customer service channel I trust is the phone. And so the reason I bring that up is because I think when we think about the journey of AI, it really starts with this original belief that AI was never going to be good enough, that it wasn't a suitable alternative for customer service. And so when we were at the time saying, oh, AI is not about replacing humans, it's about augmenting them. It was really more about the condemnation of the AI technology. Have you seen a chatbot? That's not replacing any human agents. And so it was really easy to say that we're not affecting the workforce. Then it became a little bit of a defense mechanism, right? As we started to see generative AI and agentic AI, the technology was getting a little bit better. Suddenly, we were saying we knew that it might actually be for real. And I think business leaders a little bit silently were acknowledging that this will take off a significant amount of work, but they didn't really want to be stoking fear in their teams and they didn't want to be losing morale. And so they would sort of say, your jobs are safe, we're going to augment them, even though they didn't really have a real plan for all that. And what we're seeing now, though, is that we're actually getting, as we get even more familiar with the technology, we're seeing the pendulum swing a little bit back, where yes, we're acknowledging that there are certain things that AI does really well, but we're also acknowledging things that humans can do that perhaps they weren't able to do when they were still consumed with lower value work. But now that we can reshuffle workflow, they're finally ready to make an impact on that. And from our data, we see that those three areas are emotional empathy. So really being able to respect the magnitude of how the customer feels and what they're going through. The second is experiential relation. This is I can put myself in your shoes. I know what it's like to lose my job and have to make rent. I know what it's like to miss a flight and be worried about making an important job interview. And so I can understand how to walk you through solving the problem. AI can say, oh, I'm sorry you're going through that, or I hate when this happens, or that's so unfortunate. But no AI has ever missed a job interview because its flight was late, right? So you don't necessarily have that same degree of trust and authority when it comes to actually helping you navigate the problem. And that's where humans can play a big role, something that you just can't get from any other form. And then finally, error translation. They know where the knowledge base falls short. They know where policy doesn't apply, and they can make those determinations. Now, if we're trying to think about what can make the experience more human, what can put our mark on it to show that we care about customers, then that's where humans are going to play a bigger role. So I think that as we start to really understand exactly what AI does well, we've also really understood what humans do well, and we therefore have a better understanding of why we need that balance. One final thing I would throw out there, and this is something that Brooke and I were at our exchange recently in Charlotte, and we had a speaker who was formerly a co-founder of founder of SoulCycle, and she brought up this really belief in the human touch, and she got me thinking that if everyone's customer service starts to sound the same, if everyone is basically using the same type of generative or agentic AI, the responses are very similar, people are going to get more and more comfortable using it. So you'll solve certain answers faster. Customers will accept those answers. But guess what's going to be missing? Your brand voice. What's going to be missing is what makes you different, what makes you special. The truth is, there's nothing, Disney's not special because it answers questions in a certain time frame. It's special because everything it does around those answers. And that's really where humans are going to play a bigger role, where they're going to be that cloud around the fact-based customer service that helps your brand really stand out. And I don't think that can be underappreciated.
Thanks for sharing, Brian. I mean, so many great points there. And I think, Jared, the point you made about that example where it's really putting humans versus, chatbots and AI together, like putting them humans versus AI. And realistically, it's not about that. It's really understanding where each adds the most value, where it can add to the experience rather than detract. And so kind of coming to a place where the frontline offers both and it's able to really highlight the benefits of both, I think is the direction that we're headed in. But you, Brian, also shared a lot of the obstacles up front. Some of the research pointed to things like fragmented systems, inefficient workflows, lack of preparation. So I wanted to get both of your thoughts and your opinions on what is the biggest driver of concern on your end today, and what would you say is the most prominent obstacle to getting to this point that Brian just kind of mapped out?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. The report does a great job sort of talking about all of the hurdles, the biggest hurdles, the hallmarks of the messy middle that come after purchasing something like AI. And I'd back it up a little bit further too. I'd say that the biggest obstacle right now is just getting started. I think that the market is not being very helpful in providing these assessments in terms of what are the early wins, what can be a great pilot, where should you look, how should you integrate. I think right now it's very we're selling the finish line and we're not talking much about the race, right? So I think that there are sort of like three things that buyers really need. What's the proof? Where are the real use cases? How much does this actually cost? To Brian's point about the commodification of these models. Like if we're all on the same model, who's paying what? What is a token in the future after some of these companies IPO? We don't know. But getting clear answers to these things before we sign anything. And I think the most important one is to give, as we mentioned earlier, contact center operators a seat at the table. I think reports like this kind of highlight what the real struggles are. And this is a people decision before it's a tech decision. So good change brings people along for the journey, and it doesn't get handed down from the top, right? Push it down from the top. That's a surefire sign that your pilot's going to stall, because the people who have to live with the reality, have to also reconcile the 10 tools that they're using and things like this to make the pilot a possibility in the first place. So we'll talk about this a little later, but at Diabolocom, we talk about this concept of the super operator. We really think that this change is tech enabled. When we talk about rescaling and retooling, I think that if you're able to reconcile some of these core technical problems with great product, great design, great experiences, that the end user benefits, and that trickles down to the customer journey as well. So yeah, I think that's my answer, is like just reconcile how we're going to get started, recognize what good looks like, and be a good evangelist within your organization about where the wins are.
Yeah, and I think what I would add, is that it's not even just about the challenge that you will face during the implementation phase. So I think one, we definitely need to press our partners, our vendors to work with us and understanding, okay, if I deploy, what's going to happen? What's going to break? What's going to work? What limitations does my data infrastructure create that will thwart success? I think we need to have real conversations about that. I think the just set it and forget it model, I think we're recognizing is not true. But those who can really partner with organizations to help them understand what is true, what's not true, what do you need to know, that's going to be really key. But I also want to focus on, once we get all that right, there's still a gray area, an area that we haven't really addressed that needs to be addressed. And that is, what if it does work? What if the AI does absorb exactly the issues we're thinking of? It does meaningfully change workflow. What happens next? So right off the bat, we have to look at what are, kind of echoing something you said, what are the appropriate metrics? So what results should we start to see? Now, it's very conventional wisdom on these webinars to say, don't boil the ocean, don't set unrealistic goals, don't expect to, create $85 billion in new revenue the second you deploy an AI project. Great, of course not. But we also know that we're dealing with cost-conscious teams. We're dealing with different stakeholders who need to see something. And we need to know what's working and what's not working in order to iterate accordingly. So being very clear on what those expectations look like and what is realistic is really important. The second thing is on that best case scenario thing I was talking about. So we know that as we start to automate certain issues, we sometimes fall into this fallacy that's going to be a linear transformation, right? That issues 1 through 5 will be all AI, and then 6 through 10 will be what the human agent focuses on. We forget that when you start to automate certain issues, it's going to change the way customers behave. So now instead of, where question 1, maybe they have a follow-up question that now has to go to a human employee. Or you absorb a certain demographic of customers who are very comfortable with AI, and now most of what an employee does all day is deal with that anti-tech, old school customer who only wants to talk to an agent. There's going to be a lot more nuance to the changes than just simple here, complex there. And really understanding exactly what those are is the only way to properly plan your teams, not only in terms of just training and hiring, but even the way you give them systems and the way you give them data. I think one of the things to remember is that the best agent assist tool doesn't just pipe them accurate information. It also works within them to make them more human. Lets them know when to read this directly as is, when to be use it as more of a guide. And so I think really understanding how their workflow needs to change can only happen when you recognize that this is not a one-for-one, either automate it or handle it manually. There's a lot of gray area and nuance between the tech and humanity here.
Definitely. Great point, Brian. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned in the presentation, which is that 82% of agents are navigating multiple systems daily. As we talk about, agents taking on more complex work, their workflow being more dynamic, that needs to be streamlined. And so I want to get both of your thoughts. Is this a tech problem? Is this a prioritization problem or a leadership problem?
Yeah, I think that's Yes, right. Yes, it is. I don't know how you feel about this, Brian, but I think it's kind of a mix of all three. Obviously, leadership making decisions, the tech enabled future that we're talking about, and sort of like how do we get there, right? So instead of like pulling apart like which one's more important than the other, I think that we can recognize that we're in a really rare opportunity, that like we're actually talking about the reality of agents and their lived experience every day. And we also have this, appetite for big change, right? Brought to you by all of the interest in AI. So I think this is really the perfect moment to stop and take a look at every tool in your stack and ask the question: is this helping my agent serve the customer, or is this sort of getting in the way? And I think that asking that question, there's only one source for a real answer, and that comes from actually talking to your agents and your contact center people, giving them a seat at the table. So I think while a lot of the point solutions maybe it won't survive the reconciliation or the consolidation, I think that's fine, because I think cleaning it up isn't necessarily a cost. It's sort of a win waiting to happen. Obviously, I'm biased. I think that the suite always wins. The more consolidation you can do, probably the better. When we talk about bouncing between 10 different systems, no single source of truth, I think that's a clear-cut case for a consolidation story. But when everything lives in one place, the agent feels present in the conversation, and that's the most important thing. We've talked about this a couple of times in this call already, but I think presence is the key. So when it comes to making our decisions, let's be present, in our leadership discussions about what the tech is and what the outcomes that we're trying to drive, as well as enable our agents to be present in their decision making. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, one, I think you hit on exactly the point, which is that it may present as a tech problem because it's easy to say, hey, our systems are not up to par, let's blame the tech. But the reality is that the tech to integrate your contact center, the tech to unify your channels, to unify your data, to get the right knowledge in the right hands, that's existed for many years. And it certainly exists through what your organization is doing, what other organizations are doing. They're innovating to where the core problems with tech have long been solved. So now the question is like, how do we navigate the fact that the tech is out there and actually take the right action with it? So that's where, to Brooke, your point, I think there is a prioritization problem. We saw from the stat on that same slide that only about a quarter of organizations have taken meaningful action to unify their contact centers. So this is one of those things where silos and fragments have existed in every business conference sector since long before I was born. And yet we're still talking about those because we need to figure out how to make them work for organization and really take the action. That is a prioritization problem. So that's one right there. The second thing is really looking at people, because even if we do have the right tech, as we showed, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in a second, that if only 17% of agents are fully ready for all this work, and most are really not getting the training that they need, most are not seeing the changes in compensation and workflow planning, then even if we have a perfect tech atmosphere that in theory pipes exactly what the agent should say at any given moment, gives them all the context they could possibly want, if they don't have the right confidence, the right training, the right cognitive headspace to be able to say, here's what I need to do, and then the empowerment to actually do it. So having a team that's ready to say, okay, your role is now being a consultant. We need to give you more approval process. We need to give you more autonomy to do that. If you don't make those transformations because of your rigid leadership style, your rigid training style, your rigid hiring style, then you could spend millions of dollars on new tech and you're not going to see a different outcome. So I think it's one, prioritize actually solving your tech problems, but two, prioritize what you need to enhance that tech so it's not a shiny new toy, but instead a vehicle for excellence.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. And you pretty much perfectly bring me to my next question, which is about that exact stat that you brought up, which is about employee readiness. And we also asked a poll to the audience, so I'll share some stats from that as well. So when we asked the audience here, we got 27% said that yes, their agents are fully prepared for next generation work. 46% said somewhat, they are starting training and upskilling initiatives, and then 27% said no, they have not made any progress. So, somewhat in line with our stat, but probably a little bit better off on this call. So yeah, same number 2 years in a row, 17% say that their employees are fully ready to take on complex work. Now that is very low. So I want to get your thoughts. What is causing this lack of movement? Brian, you gave us a little bit of insight, but why are leaders continually disregarding agent training?
Yeah, I actually want to get a quick read from Brian real quick. Did this stat surprise you? Sort of 2 years flat on this question.
It doesn't surprise me when I think of the agents that I deal with as a consumer. I think it
Mm,
does surprise me insofar as like I know that this community is very much protective of its people, right? And they're very confident. When I go to events, like they really have full faith that their teams right now are the right teams, and they know that they feel like they are being coached well. So to still acknowledge that there's gaps, that's maybe what's surprising, because it's not a very self-serving stat, right? It's basically saying that the team I manage isn't ready, and that maybe doesn't make them look good. So I think that the candor, the realness is perhaps what surprises me. But I think if we're just being honest, you call the typical agent, I don't think you think that typical agent is like going to solve, complex problems all the time when they can't even seem to figure out like what your email address is for your account.
mm. Yeah, when I saw this, I was initially pretty surprised. I guess unlike you, but I started thinking about it a bit more, and I think 2 years would have sort of been like the main thread in the 2 years that we've been working on this question, and I think it's sort of been figure it out, right? I think it's sort of been trust that the AI is worth it, trust that implementing this will solve a lot of problems for your organization, and we're really lacking this. What does great even look like, right? Like we're lacking the use cases and some of the stories that we talked about earlier, and we're just sort of sold this bright future of figure it out in your own way and you'll get there. So I think Diabolocom, what we try to offer is a picture of a super operator, right? That solves kind of the same problem that you just articulated, which was how do we get agents to sort of like get out of that system, look up instead of like trying to find your email or find the most relevant data points and make sense of that and bounce between different systems. How can we start to turn our agents into a little bit more of a consultant that works hand in hand with AI, is a human in the loop of the solution. And I think that's a principle that we bring to our roadmap, as well as like a principle that we bring to the marketing that we're trying to execute to. I think we want to be really pragmatic and educate people and bring people along on what's working and what's not. And that's what I like most about this study that we did here, is we've included some stories from customers that we've worked with. We've talked about bringing people to the table to make decisions. We've talked about governance a little bit. I think that these are all super relevant cases, and we've brought some real examples with us, and happy to dive into those a little bit more. But I think once you can see the target, right, the path gets a lot closer. So if you're able to give your frontline people the training that fits a real job, and you can bring a partner along to pick the right use cases, start with those that clearly work and prove them out, I think that the wins compound. And I also like to say that I think this like 17% number that we've been talking about is trying perhaps to train for a future that isn't as well defined, or seems like a moving target, right? Like once we know what great looks like, then we can really put the effort behind preparing and right sizing for that. But as AI especially continues to move so fast, it's a little bit difficult to define where the finish line actually is.
And what I think is also worth mentioning is that I believe that one of the fallacies we've had in this AI for simple, humans for complex is we've reduced that sense of what complex is to just being a little bit warmer, a little bit more openly empathetic, a little bit like more conversational. And no one wants to, think that like their team isn't capable of doing that. Like we always used to talk about cliche, hire the smile, train the skill. Like we always wanted to believe that humans were fundamentally capable of at least being people, and then we can teach them about new processes and new tech and all that. And so I think at first there might have been some false confidence that we ultimately want to just have them become really effective at the emotional side, and forgetting that there's a lot of things that are going to change that are not just purely rooted in emotion. So the one I used to mock was when we would hear, oh, my agents are not going to be spending as much time doing customer service. They're going to be doing like more of a data analysis role and like analyzing feedback. I'm like, well, let's hold on a second. Like we hire people with like statistical backgrounds to be our BIs. Like they're our BAs. Like we're not necessarily going to be like just having them magically someone who is a script reader is suddenly running complex data analysis. Like, we need to be really, to your point, be very clear about what this role entails. I think the other thing on top of that is we forget how many things go into making someone more empathetic. It is not just being nicer, being an inherently warm person. It is also, one, having the data about that customer, their sentiment, their intentions, to know what they're going through and know how to empathize. And if we don't have a framework for getting that to the right person and then give them the tools to use it, we're not actually, able to tap into their fundamental empathy. They're not coming across as prepared. Similarly, as I alluded to earlier, if we're saying that you're that expert layer, you're the fail safe, you're the escalation person, and you don't have any more power than that AI agent did, you're not actually able to provide any additional service for the customer. So even if you are fundamentally an empathetic, warm, problem-solving kind of person, you don't get to look like that to the customer if you don't have permission to do so. So I think the other way to frame this stat is the 17% is not just my agents stink, I hired the wrong people. It's instead my ecosystem does not cultivate the right type of talent. So whether I hire the right person or not, I'm not getting what I need out of them because I'm not putting them in position to succeed. So I think I look at this as much as a wholesale, the entire contact center ecosystem needs to change, not just I have some unprepared agents who I wish were smarter or friendlier.
I really appreciate that context. Sort of like a talent, like supply chain question, asking a question each sort of phase there, as opposed to just like the headline I tried to slap on it.
And then you have the AI readiness piece, where are not only is your organization ready for AI, but are they ready for AI? Brooke and I, we'll interact occasionally with AI platforms, and we get vastly different answers because we prompt it differently. We have different personalities. Knowing how to prompt it in the heat of a moment, customers going through something very difficult, knowing how to navigate AI-based tools, that's a skill in its own right. That's a skill that wasn't being talked about in our types of events 5-10 years ago, but that's going to be just as critical as being empathetic. Like, you're going to need to also know how to use these tools. And so there's a lot more to that readiness and that training than just making them a little bit friendlier and warmer and more conversational.
Yeah, nice.
Completely agree. And I want to call out that we've talked about this report throughout the webinar, but there is actually a link that you can click on the screen right now if you'd like to download the report. Also, we have about 15 minutes left, so please leave your questions in the chat now, so when we have time at the end, we can answer them. So moving along here, we talk about preparation a lot throughout the webinar, and it's obviously a key piece, pivotal piece of the AI journey. But I want to ask, what does a genuine AI assessment and readiness assessment actually look like in practice?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of assessments you could probably just Google and you find one from Deloitte or a different vendor. But I think the assessment needs to be a self-assessment, one that's coached and comes from a partner who understands where you're coming from. Otherwise, I think it's just like sort of like a demo, like a quick hypothetical and a gut feeling. Only 1 in 5 teams run like a real world pilot. So I think like what a genuine start might look like is not with the tool. It's with sitting with your agents and mapping exactly what eats their day, what tasks feel repetitive, where they jump between different systems. That tells you where AI perhaps belongs, what agents can actually do to resolve some of the, the transfer of information or the resolving of repetitive low value tasks, and where it might not. Then I'd sort of check your foundation. We all know this, right? Like, is your data clean? Is it ready? Is it portable? And can you make sense of it, more importantly? AI on top of the mess just gives you more mess. A story that we have in the report comes from Culligan. Culligan International is a great example. They didn't just automate a whole job or implement an agency, see how it went. They actually talked to their folks and said, what is like one of your most painful tasks? I think we're aware of a tool that can resolve some of this. I happen to be processing emails, building reports, and doing follow-ups. They're able to automate that with the platform. And that voicemail handling time dropped 70%. And at the same time, they're able to do more with their people on increased their NPS score, achieving like an industry benchmark for them for the first time. So super interesting story. It's in the report. I think the other thing too is like the pilot needs to be in the real world, not a sandbox. I know it can sound risky of just like unleashing the automation or the AI into your customer facing functions. But I think that's where the real data is, and that's where the context is going to be, and you'll be able to understand what breaks and what doesn't. And I also think it's important to measure the agent, not just the customer too. So if you're having these conversations with the frontline reps, are you tracking their effort and how they feel about the tool? If the people are using it if they're feeling frustrated, or if there's any early warning signs that the pilot isn't going to work from an EX standpoint, not just a CX standpoint. So a real assessment answers like, the one question: will this make my people better at the work that's coming, or is it just sort of a demonstration of the art of the possible, really? So, and I think there's like sort of a way to triangulate the answer to that. It's equal parts EX, CX, and your business function as well. What do you think of that, Brian?
Yeah, well, one, I would say that I don't think, again, we didn't have a poll question for this, but I would imagine if Brooke had published a poll right now that said, do you sit in a room with other leaders and come up with ways to make life difficult for your employees or neglect what they're going through? No one's going to say that that's what they're doing. I mean, the truth is most of these projects are well-intentioned. And I think when people do, especially agent-facing AI, they truly do believe they are going to move the needle in a way that if it doesn't make your employees happier, it at least makes them more productive, feel more supported, feel more empowered. The good intentions are usually there. Where it breaks down, though, is at the end of the day, you're still a leader trying to get the results that you want through the mechanisms that you think are the most logical. And the truth is that at the end of the day, you have to think about what it ultimately means for the front line. Usability is primarily, by definition, going to be defined by the user. I can do demos, I can look at all these things, but analysts on my team, if they don't feel good about the technology, it doesn't matter that I'm excited about it. It comes down to whether they themselves are able to actually use it. And I think that is one where, it's not just about having the right intentions, it's about really giving them the seat at the table. And as I said earlier, the challenge is that when it's difficult for them to use, not only does that stunt the efficiency, not only does that inhibit progress, but you also don't really learn what's working and what's not working. And so you can't optimize it moving forward. And Jared, I think that goes to your point about like doing real world like examples and real world production to understand what's actually happening here, because you can't simulate the fact that, oh, this customer asked the one question we weren't prepared for, and it took the employee way too long to figure out how to address that. That's only going to happen when you start to have this in the real world. And if you're not getting true usability, you're not going to learn what works and what doesn't, how to improve that moving forward. Additionally, I think there is the cultural piece here as well. Like, you really want to show that my job as a leader is to make your life easier so you can do better work. And if you don't come up with ways to make the usability of texting clear, wait, wow, my life is so much better because I have this new solution, you don't have that buy-in, you don't have that trust. And that's going to prevent you from, I think, rallying them around other changes that are happening. The truth is that we can go up here and we could show the data saying that compensation's not changing fast enough, career paths aren't changing fast enough. And don't get me wrong, they need to change a lot faster. But I also know if I get up here in this webinar and say, everyone give all of your agents a massive raise because they're taking on harder tasks, that's not going to be practical. And so we are going to be asking them to do things for us. They're going to be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more new, a little bit more confusing, a little bit more frustrating at times. And if they don't trust that we're doing it to really make their life better, their experience stronger, and their impact more valuable, then we're not going to have their buy-in along the way when we need them to take on some change. And so it's really key to show that we're committed to making their life better on the front lines, and then they will perform better for us in the long run.
Yeah, there's something that you said in our notes before our chat, is that like no one is perfectly ready for this change, but everybody is partially ready for this change. Like, we've already all made progress in this direction, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the other thing too, is that you don't want to have a scenario where you're looking at risk management as, hey, we know our employees are not perfect. We know we don't have a single source of truth for our data, so we shouldn't invest in AI. It's instead based on those knowledge, here's what we can do right now, and here's what we need to fix to move everything moving forward. And so that is a key, is that the risk management is not what is the risk of AI going wrong? It's also what is the risk of not using AI to elevate our humanity within our experiences? Because if other organizations are able to let their human agents spend more time with customers, become more true consultants, make upsell opportunities, we're falling behind, and that is a risk. So the idea that, like, okay, you don't have a perfect ecosystem, hold tight for the next 5 years and wait for you to migrate to the platform you want and wait for everything to be perfect. You don't have that luxury. Your luxury is really aligning with what customers need right now. And I think that that is, where you really need to understand what you can do for that. And so again, really understand what you need to do, what you can do, what you can't do, and then ultimately determine what that should say as far as where your use cases are, what human training you need to do, what strategy you need to evolve, and then go all that the long way. Finally, education is really key. So we know that, at the end of the day, we're asking customers and employees to change how they interact. We're asking customers to interact in a new type of channel. We're asking employees to use new tools. They're not going to inherently assume that this is going to be good for them. People hate change. They hate new technologies. We at times, Brooke and I have processes where we use spreadsheets for things that could easily be handled by better platforms, but we use it because we're stubborn and we know it and we know habit. If you don't give them a real reason for what this is going to mean for them, it's going to thwart their resistance to change. So also understanding why they like today's systems and what you have to overcome to make them like tomorrow's systems, that's going to be an important conversation to have as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, we have just 5 minutes left, so please leave your questions in the chat. But I do have one more question. Going back to the human, since that is obviously still a key piece of the equation here, where do you see the human role in the contact center looking meaningfully different just 3 years from now?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of different pieces of this. Obviously, this report is a lot about how do we enable this type of change. But if we could take a step back and try to understand where we're heading, I think like in 3 years out, I would say the bar for customer experience is definitely higher, and it's higher because of the presence of a couple of key strategic decisions. Right, where are your people? Are they in the loop? Are they automated out completely? Are they still working on this transformation? The second is where is your data? Do you own it? Is it training your models? Is it within your organization, or are you shipping it to another company to sort of contribute to this commodification of the CX experience at the very lower levels? I think that the winning experiences, just from our perspective at Diabolocom, will be human in the loop with more room for real human moments, not fewer, of a higher value. And I think behind the scenes, again, the super operator is the one who's working hand in hand with AI. AI is clearing the busy work out and turning the data into better calls in the moment, so that your team has the capacity to be fully present on the front line. And that shows up as one thing, really the quality of every interaction going up and the response that you get from your customers. So I think that what gives me confidence out of this report is that we probably won't have the sparkly everything automated into a closed loop with no people in it in the near future. But that's also not the future that we learned that the leaders are most interested in building. So, and I don't think, true to the anecdote at the top about that commercial, I don't think it's the one that customers want either. So at the end of the day, a great conversation is still one of the best ways to grow a business. And 3 years from now, that's more true, not less. Brian, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I think if we think about it, we've talked about for years the cliche, hey, we're not a cost center, we're a value center. And I actually think that the ideal dynamic is where the humans can start to play that role in generating value. So if we look at every support interaction, not just as a way to solve a problem, but as a way to grow the relationship, the growing the relationship part is where ideally the human sits. So the AI can accurately provide an answer to the question. With agentic AI, it can take more action. So it can do more than just, regurgitate the knowledge base. It can really adapt. It's going to provide a faster, more complete, probably better written and better explained answer than a lot of humans will at this point. So let the answering, let the support be the AI part. What happens after that support is really where the human can start to come into play. So when you can look at, hey, I noticed you were concerned about your phone bill being way too high. Well, guess what? We have an unlimited plan and I've already had 15 customers switch. And this is what's really worked for them. Giving them that really reassurance, you generate an upsell there. Or, I see that you keep running into trouble with your router restarting. Here's what I did to, avoid that. Showing that you're thinking about the totality of their interactions. What can I learn from this to make the relationship stronger? What correlations can I spot? How can I be a better advocate for the brand and the customer all at once? That is where the human's going to play a bigger role. So I think that they're going to go from being the real mechanism for delivering support to a mechanism for turning support into an opportunity to grow the relationship and a way to put your brand stamp on a transaction.
Nice.
Well, thank you both so much for joining. I think, this is such an important conversation, and I'm so excited for everyone in the audience to read the report. There's so much great insight and data. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jared, for joining us today.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Brian.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.